And I spent time reading and researching when I was younger. And I went to see his sort of group at the time, and he had like maybe 3 guitarists, might even have had 4.
As Led Zeppelin's guitarist, Jimmy Page defined hard rock. But he has always been a tough critic with no time for bands he didn't respect. If your band fell short of his towering standards, you weren't just another act. You were a disappointment to the craft. And now, after years of speculation, the name of the one band he truly could not stand has finally been brought to light. First on that list is the one band Page confessed he simply couldn't stomach. But they weren't the only ones in his crosshairs. Page's list of musical grievances ran deeper. 1. The Sex Pistols.
As soon as any promoter puts you on, they use the Sex Pistols.
This is the band Jimmy absolutely couldn't stand. One of the first and loudest groups that Jimmy Page truly disliked was not just a band, but a whole new movement called punk rock. The most famous of these punk bands was the Sex Pistols. For Jimmy Page, who had built his whole life on being an amazing musician and writing complicated songs, punk rock sounded like a complete mess. It was a personal insult to everything he believed in. The problem wasn't just that the music sounded different. It was a war between the old generation of rock stars and the new, angry kids on the block.
That gig was, like, so absolutely incredible that, like...
The punks screamed about having no future and wanting to destroy everything. This was the exact opposite of Led Zeppelin's music, which was filled with epic stories, fantasy, and magic that was meant to help you escape from the world, not burn it down. Page didn't seem scared of punk rock. He just seemed confused and disgusted by it. He thought it was a joke. In an interview in 1977, when the Sex Pistols were everywhere in the news, you could hear how much he hated it.
We hadn't been allowed to play it right from that Bill Grundy thing. Everyone got really paranoid right away, all the way since then.
"I'm not worried about the Pistols," he said, sounding like a king talking about peasants. "What's the point? The musical content is what's important, and I don't hear any musical content." This was the ultimate insult from a master like Page. He spent weeks in the studio layering dozens of guitar parts to create incredible sounds. So, when he heard a song like Anarchy in the UK, which was famous for having only a few simple guitar chords, he thought it was just childish noise.
They're just as fed up as writing about all the old shit groups as well.
It just sells their papers, putting us in it now.
He didn't see it as powerful and raw. He saw it as lazy and untalented. He hated that the punk rockers were proud of not being able to play their instruments very well. To him, the singer Johnny Rotten's sneering and the bass player Sid Vicious's sloppy playing were just a silly show, not real music. The whole scandal of punk was its goal to get rid of the rock gods. In the 1970s, musicians like Jimmy Page were treated like gods. They were mysterious, incredibly talented, and lived lives of fame and luxury.
So, like, you know, it's a logical conclusion, do you know what I mean? Boredom, and like, I'm that way inclined, so what do I turn to?
Punk wanted to destroy that idea. They said anyone could be in a band. You didn't need to be a guitar wizard, you just needed anger and something to say. They wanted to smash the expensive guitars and replace them with cheap ones. They wanted to get rid of the long 20-minute guitar solos that Page was famous for and replace them with 2-minute blasts of energy. Page, who thought a guitar solo was like telling a special story within a song, could only see this as a huge step backward. He heard no changes in volume, no quiet parts and loud parts, which was the secret to all his music.
Yeah, we've been playing abroad.
It's all right abroad, though.
Yeah, we had to go to Amsterdam and play a few days.
Can you get egg and chips over there?
All he heard was shouting and noise. The biggest scandal for Page was that people were actually paying attention to what he called a fad. He thought it was just a burst of ugly anger that celebrated being bad at music instead of trying to be great. But Page didn't just dislike the new bands that tried to tear him down. He also had problems with a band that came up at the exact same time as him. Jimmy Page had a clear vision for what made music great. If you want to hear more about the rock and roll battles he fought, make sure you're subscribed for the full story. 2. The Kinks.
Or any name that came along, I left it to the promoter. If he wanted to call us, something, thingamajigs.
Jimmy Page's problems with the Kinks were complicated and personal. It wasn't just that he didn't like their songs. It was a relationship built on a deep history and a major rock and roll scandal that is still argued about today. The Kinks were another huge British band from the 1960s, just like Zeppelin would become. But their story got tangled up with Page's long before he was a rock god. Back then, Page was a young guitar player for hire. If a band needed a great guitar part for their song, they would call Jimmy Page.
It was about transvestite.
Was it?
Yeah.
I love that. And it was banned.
It was banned because it was about Coca-Cola.
He was known as a session musician, and he was one of the best in London. This is where the big scandal begins. In 1964, the Kinks released a song called You Really Got Me. It was a massive hit, and it changed rock music forever because of its powerful, fuzzy, and heavy guitar riff. It was one of the first times anyone had heard a sound that would later become hard rock and heavy metal.
Oh, definitely.
It's not just strictly a commercial venture.
Actually, if it was, I wouldn't be able to do it. If I thought of it that way, I wouldn't be able to do it.
The official story from the Kinks is that the band's guitarist Dave Davies got that sound by taking a razor blade and slicing the speaker of his small amplifier. But another story has always floated around, a rumor that has made the band furious for decades. That rumor is that Jimmy Page, the hired session player, is the one who actually played that famous guitar part.
You take everything from that, from what you see. Say I used to go on a train to art college.
Page himself has sometimes hinted that he was involved or that he played on the track, while the Kinks members, especially Dave Davies, have always said that is a complete lie. This created a huge amount of bad blood between them. Imagine another artist taking credit for your most famous creation. It was a deep insult. This fight over who played what was only part of the problem. Musically, Jimmy Page and the Kinks' main songwriter, Ray Davies, lived on different planets. Ray Davies wrote brilliant songs about everyday life in England. He wrote about sitting and watching the world go by in Waterloo sunset, or making fun of stylish people in Dedicated Follower of Fashion. His songs were like short stories about real people and real places. Jimmy Page, on the other hand, was not interested in everyday life. He wanted to create magic and mystery. His songs were about Norse gods, epic battles, dragons, and mystical journeys. He built giant worlds with his music. So when he listened to the Kinks, he likely heard songs that he thought were small and uninteresting. He probably found them clever, but they didn't have the size, the power, or the fantasy that he thought made rock music truly great. Page was building musical castles, while Ray Davies was describing the street corner in front of the castle. The clash was between the epic and the ordinary. Page wanted to transport his listeners to another reality. While his issue with the Kinks was about credit and style, his problem with another major band was about their whole approach to being heavy. 3. Black Sabbath.
When everybody came back, well, let's just put this down. So we put it down, and that was it. It wasn't intended as a single or anything. It was just another one for the album. But it did come as a...
Most people think of Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath as the two great fathers of heavy metal. They are often talked about in the same breath, like two sides of the same heavy coin. But Jimmy Page would have completely disagreed. His issue with Black Sabbath was not about a personal fight or a nasty scandal. It was about something much deeper. A complete disagreement about what made heavy music good.
Brought our gear with our suitcases and stuff.
Can't believe it now that we actually took the column speakers in a plastic cover on them.
The secret scandal here is that Page, one of the creators of heavy music, quietly looked down on Black Sabbath's music, thinking it was too simple and not very creative. Jimmy Page had a golden rule for his music: light and shade. This was his secret recipe. It meant that his songs needed to have dynamics. That is, they needed both quiet parts and loud parts. He believed that the loud, heavy parts felt even more powerful if they came after a soft, gentle part.
Yeah, it was mainly the drugs, but we were managing ourselves because we'd been ripped off horribly in the 70s.
It was all about contrast, like how a bright light seems brighter in a dark room. Think about Stairway to Heaven. It starts with a beautiful, quiet acoustic guitar and slowly builds up, getting louder and more powerful until it explodes into one of the most famous guitar solos ever. That journey from light to shade, from quiet to loud, was everything to Page. It was how he told stories with sound. It made the music exciting and unpredictable.
There were, but they just split up. It was like, I don't know what it was. They just folded up.
Do you think a name like the Black Sabbath is important in getting to the top?
A name means whatever you want to interpret it to be,
When Jimmy Page listened to Black Sabbath, he didn't hear any of that. He heard music that was all shade, all the time. From the very first scary notes of their first album, Black Sabbath's music was dark, slow, and crushing. It was incredibly heavy, and millions of people loved it. But to Page, it was like a big, heavy truck that started up and never changed its speed. It was all one mood, dark and doomy.
Oh, God. You guys were wiped out, right?
Completely.
We were wiped out before we got the fucking tax bill.
The singer, Ozzy Osbourne, wailed over Tony Iommi's huge, sludgy guitar riffs. The songs were powerful, but they didn't have the ups and downs that Page loved. He probably found this incredibly boring. In his mind, Black Sabbath was missing half of the ingredients that made music great. This deep difference in style is part of the big debate about who really invented heavy metal. People who say it was Black Sabbath point to their pure, non-stop heaviness.
And the bloke said, well, it's a brilliant idea. How do you visualize it? He said, lifestyles, of course.
But Page would have argued that he did it first on songs like Dazed and Confused or Whole Lotta Love, and that he did it better because he mixed the heavy parts with other styles like folk, blues, and pop. He never went on TV to say he hated Black Sabbath. He was too smart for that. Instead, his criticism was hidden in the way he talked about his own music. Every time he went on and on about how important Light and Shade was, he was secretly taking a shot at bands like Black Sabbath, who he felt ignored that rule.
And it just wasn't working, things just wasn't happening. We ended up rehearsing for 11 months and nothing was coming up. So we'd come up with plenty of riffs and stuff, but no.
The issue wasn't a loud public fight. It was a quiet, artistic snub. In Page's mind, he was a master chef creating a complex meal with many different flavors. He saw Black Sabbath as a cook who only knew how to make one thing, a giant heavy block of burnt steak. Page was bothered by bands he felt were too simple, but he was just as confused by a new type of music that seemed to be against everything he loved about rock and roll. Page's biggest criticisms were often the quietest. If you love getting the inside story on these hidden artistic rivalries, hit that subscribe button before we move on. 4. Nirvana.
And, technology nowadays, 99% of all studios sound too, digital, And,
yeah, that's definitely not Steve, is it?
Yeah, so he used, a lot of...
Many years after punk rock tried to tear down the old rock stars, a new movement rose up in the early 1990s and tried to do it all over again. This movement was called grunge, and it came from the rainy city of Seattle. The most famous grunge band by far was Nirvana. For Jimmy Page, grunge was just as confusing and annoying as punk had been. The whole point of grunge seemed to be to destroy the flashy, fun, and over-the-top rock star image of the 1980s.
The last 2 years are our best experiences with, drugs and having a new child and all the press coming down on us and stuff like that. I decided to
And that image was really just a copy of the godlike image that Jimmy Page himself had perfected in the 1970s. The big scandal of grunge was that it turned the entire idea of a rock star upside down. It made being sad, angry, and normal seem cool, and that was something Jimmy Page could never understand. Page's dislike for grunge came from a deep place. He just didn't get what the music was trying to say.
Because you don't need those fans, fans to blow your hair while you're playing for that, image thing, It's more of a Mother Nature deal.
He thought rock and roll was supposed to be about joy, power, and fun. It was supposed to be an escape. In an interview, he explained his problem with it. "I have a problem with the grungy thing," he said. "A lot of it is just not very joyous. It's music of complaint. This tells you everything you need to know about his way of thinking. Even when Led Zeppelin played the blues, which is often sad music, it still had a power and energy that made you feel good."
I don't know, it hasn't really hit us. It hasn't really had any kind of impact whatsoever, financially, emotionally. I mean, we made the record and now we're just kind of out.
Zeppelin's songs were big stories about magic and adventure. Nirvana's songs were about feeling lost, being angry, and hating yourself. It was like Page wanted to take you to a magical fantasy land. while Nirvana's singer, Kurt Cobain, wanted to lock you in his bedroom and tell you all his problems. Page listened to the dark, fuzzy guitars of grunge and just heard depressing noise.
You know, we don't have to worry about them screwing up stuff, like calling them up, like, what the heck are you doing? You know, they work for us. They're our slaves. And we walk in there and we throw them scraps.
On top of that, grunge was completely against the idea of being a guitar hero. The long, complicated, and beautiful guitar solo, which was Jimmy Page's signature move, was seen as old-fashioned and silly by many grunge bands. Kurt Cobain's guitar solos were usually short, loud, and messy blasts of feeling. He wasn't trying to show off how well he could play, he was just trying to make an angry sound. For Page, a true master of the instrument, this must have looked like a slap in the face. It was like a world-famous painter watching a new artist become famous for just throwing buckets of black paint at a wall. The whole image of grunge was also an attack on the classic rock star. Page wore amazing outfits with dragons on them and stood on stage looking like a powerful wizard. Kurt Cobain wore old flannel shirts and ripped jeans and looked like he hated being famous. He was the anti-rock star, and he became a hero for it. Jimmy Page, the ultimate rock star, was completely baffled.
I absolutely do.
So help you God. All right, there you have it. Proof positive. This is actually Gaddafi's green book. It's not the Bible. No, it is the Bible.
He saw this new generation of musicians throwing away all the best parts of rock music on purpose. They were rejecting the fun, the fantasy, the style, and the amazing musicianship. The tragic death of Kurt Cobain probably just proved to Page that the whole scene was built on something dark and unhealthy, not something creative and powerful. His dislike for Nirvana wasn't mean. It was the total confusion of a master artist watching the world fall in love with something he saw as the opposite of art. But his issues weren't only with bands that came after him. He also had a fierce rivalry with a group that fought him for the top spot throughout the 1970s. 5. Deep Purple.
The sort of magnificence of the large arena performance shouldn't be lost. And a lot of...
In the giant stadium of 1970s rock music, the biggest fight was between Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple. Jimmy Page's dislike for this band wasn't about them being too simple or too sad. This was a straightforward, head-to-head battle for the crown. His dislike came from the most basic reason of all: they were the enemy. The scandal was the intense competition between them to be the #1 band in the world. Every album Deep Purple sold was an album Zeppelin didn't sell. Every concert ticket they sold was a ticket Zeppelin didn't.
He was, as I said, an alpha guy, so was I. He wanted to control, I wanted to control, so we butted heads because of that. We still respected each other, but we never got on. We just couldn't be in the same room. That was the problem.
It was a war for the top of the charts, for the biggest crowds, and for the title of the best and loudest rock band on earth. This epic rivalry was perfectly captured in the battle between the two bands' lead guitarists, Jimmy Page and the brilliant but famously difficult Ritchie Blackmore. Both were guitar gods, but they had completely different styles and personalities, and they were always trying to one-up each other. Page's guitar playing was cool, mysterious, and deeply connected to old American blues music.
Whereas we use a lot of light and shade in the music. When it's quiet, it's quiet. When it's loud, it's loud. There's various other bands I could mention that just continue to play loud all the time.
Blackmore played his guitar with incredible speed and fury, using scales he learned from classical music. He was known for being angry and arrogant on stage, a total contrast to Page, who moved like a mysterious wizard. The two of them were like a lion and a tiger, two kings of the jungle fighting for the same territory. They competed for who could play louder, who could play faster, and who could get their picture on the cover of more magazines.
So Richie throw his guitar up and you pick your drums to pieces, and I thought, I can't sacrifice a mic. And I thought, I'll kick the monitors off there. And I thought, can I afford it?
Jimmy Page likely looked down on Deep Purple's music because he thought it wasn't as creative or artistic as his own. While Led Zeppelin was known for its incredible variety, from soft folk songs to heavy rock anthems, Deep Purple's sound was much more direct. It was a full-on audio assault, driven by John Lord's thundering Hammond organ and Blackmore's screaming guitar. To Page, who was also a master producer and cared deeply about the details of the sound, songs like Smoke on the Water or Highway Star were probably just loud.
I'm more edging more towards a blues singer. You're more of an operatic singer, you know. So that didn't go down too well. He was trying to do what I wanted in a way, and I'm like, you know.
They were great, famous rock songs, but they were like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Page preferred to use a whole toolbox of different instruments and sounds. He probably saw Deep Purple as a one-trick pony. They were very, very good at that one trick, but it was still just one trick. The scandal of their rivalry was a public spectacle. Led Zeppelin would set a record for the most people at a concert. Then the news would report that Deep Purple had been officially named the Globe's loudest band. It was a constant back and forth. Page, who saw himself as a serious composer and artist, must have been annoyed by this constant comparison to a band he likely felt was less sophisticated. He may have respected their power and their success, but it's hard to imagine he truly admired their music. They were the competition. They were the other team in the Super Bowl. His dislike was the cold, hard feeling of a champion who sees a powerful challenger trying to take his belt and is determined to prove that he is, and always will be, better. Page's criticisms weren't just random complaints. They show a musician who had a clear set of rules for what rock should be. Do you think he was right, or was he just stuck in his ways? Let us know. Like and subscribe for more.